Hello and welcome to part 2 of Wagoneer XJ axles. The roadblock I discussed at the end of last video was actually a nut on the lower ball joint, which I didn't have the right size wrench for. It was an inch and an eighth, and I had an inch and 16ths and an inch and 5/16 wrench. So obviously that wasn't going to work. So eventually what I had to do was just cut it and pound it off the cold chisel, which worked because I got the hub off. Another thing I had to do was actually cut both ball joints, as you could see there, in order to allow myself enough room. I actually also cut the U-joint off so I could get it out. Another thing that I did was remove a little bit of the steering arm that was left in there. That was just a simple castle nut, grab the right impact socket, and it came right off. Now, when I was looking around for these axles, and when I came across the deal that I did, that was too good to pass up. I did a little bit of research on putting these axles under my Jeep, which is a XJ, of course. And one thing that I had read is that the front axle actually does have a decently significant weak point. It's fixable, but it does have a weak point. These front axle shafts actually neck down and get smaller. And I'll show you what that actually means. This is the short side shaft. It's nice and thick down here, thicker than your Dana 30, but then it actually necks down right about here. It's kind of hard to see, but it actually gets thinner to the point where the U-joint is to about the size of, say, a Dana 30, and this U-joint is actually the same U-joint that fits a Dana 30. That's the problem with the front axles, or the front axle out of, say, Wagoneer or Grand Wagoneer. That is very fixable though. You can get upgraded alloy shafts that stay thick the entire way and actually use the bigger U-joint, which I may or may not end up doing at some point. But that's if you're ever looking at the Grand Wagoneer front axle for your XJ, TJ, YJ. That's what they're talking about on the weakness of the front axle. The Dana 44 axle out of a Wagoneer or Grand Wagoneer is still an upgrade though, because the axle tubes are thicker and bigger. This whole case right here is thicker and bigger. The disc brakes are a lot bigger than the one that will be found on your XJ or your TJ. There's a lot of gearing options for in here, a lot of blocker options. The Dana 44 is a very, very popular axle. So it is still an upgrade over your Dana 30, just those axle shafts are going to be your weak point. And now the actual meat and potatoes of this episode. We're going to be taking apart this whole hub, rotor, and steering knuckle assembly. The reason I'm doing this is I got to do the bearings, which are actually good, but I'm going to change them anyways. And I'm also removing the drive hub assembly, which is in there, which means it's permanently locked in, and I'm going to put in a locking hub, which means I can unlock the axle and lock the axle in. What you're looking at here is the other side already all taken apart, and then what I'm going to do is show you how to do it on the other side. It's fairly easy, something you could definitely do in your garage, not really any special tools required. Alright, your first step to take apart this whole steering knuckle assembly and brake rotor and stuff assembly part is to take out this cap. In order to do that, I used a big pry bar like this, stuck it up under here, give it a few whacks with a hammer. Spin it around, and eventually it'll start to pop off. Now I'm not really worried about damaging this cap because I'm planning on replacing it with lockout hubs. So if this cap gets damaged, I don't necessarily care. Now that there's pretty good space here, I can go take my rubber hammer and just hit it up like this, get it the rest of the way. And it's out. This grease is a lot worse than the other one on the other side. The other side, the grease is pretty much good. This is a little bit more water mixture. It looks like there's also two different types of grease mixed in there. This is what it looks like on the inside of the cap. There's a big gear right here on the axle shaft, and then there's a snap ring that holds it in. Now when you undo the snap ring, there actually is a spring under this, so be careful because it will pop out on you. just going to grab a simple pair of snap ring pliers, take the snap ring out. And it's that simple. Out comes the spring. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the lock hubs will replace, so I'm actually going to keep all these parts nice and organized and clean. But I am getting lockout hubs. I'm not sure if any of the parts are going to be reused. Next to come out is there's a big kind of nut in here. The other side was actually loose, like really loose. This one's actually tight, so I'm going to have to find a way to get that out. My solution to this nut in here being tight is to grab a brass punch. Now the idea behind the brass punch is that it's brass, it's very soft, so you can hit this, and this is going to get, the brass punch is going to get damaged, not the part you're hitting. So there's a couple teeth on it that I could hit it with. I'm just going to give it a few taps and loosen it up so I can get my fingers on it. And it's loose. Oh, actually, I forgot one thing. Now that the snap string's off this axle shaft, it'll just come right out. And this is the little short side of the axle shaft. And this is the first funny looking nut that came out. Since it has little teeth, I was able to get the little brass punch like this and just hit it so it's loose. There's probably a special tool for this, but I don't have one, so I just use this punch. Next, there's this weird lock nut washer thing. For this, what I did in the last one is just I grabbed two of the things and just pulled it out. The other side I was just able to grab it and it came right out. This one is being a little bit more of a problem. There it comes. That's what it looks like. Now there's another funny nut under here. Just like before, this one's actually tight. The other side I was able to get undone with my fingers. Just going to take the punch again, give it a few hits. And it's loose. Now luckily whoever worked on this last put a lot of grease in here, so none of these parts are seized or rusty. Since these axles that I'm working with have been sitting for probably 5-6 years. That's what I was told anyways. Most of that was outside. Luckily they were packed full of grease in here, so nothing seized or anything like that. And it's almost out. Here's the other side of that, or the other funny looking nut. It's probably a special name for that. I don't know it. And there you can see the outer bearing. Next thing I'm going to do is simply just lift off the caliper and this hub assembly off the spindle and the rest of the steering knuckle. It's fairly simple. It's all loose now since all the snap ring is and those nuts are out. Doesn't weigh that much. Stupid dust shield. And that's that. The outer bearing just comes out like that. It's not pressed in or anything. Just put that off to the side. There is a race in here that is not necessarily pressed in, it's more punched in. Just the same thing we did with getting that nut loose. Just take the brass punch, hit it from the other side, as long as you have a long enough brass punch anyways. There, now on this side there's actually a seal right here. For that, that's going to take some jiggering to get that one out. Now what I'm going to do to get the seal on this side probably isn't the right way at all, but since I'm replacing all that crap, I don't care what happens to it. I'm just going to take my pry bar and just hit it, and it'll eventually come out. I believe there actually is a seal removal tool, but of course I don't have one. And she's out. This is the inner bearing. Again, it's not pressed in, it just comes right out. They're raised though, you will have to hit that out. Just like the other side. What I'm going to do now to make things easier is I'm just going to take all the grease that's out of this little hub assembly in there, so I can actually see what's going on, so I know if the races are actually coming out or if they're stuck. There's a lot of grease in here, it's kind of messy, but who doesn't like making messes? And that's most of the grease. With all the grease out of there and that seal off the back, you can tap out the inner and the outer race. If you have a long enough brass punch, you could use that. Or if you don't have a long enough one, you could use a big pry bar or something like this that has, you know, metal top that you could hit with a hammer. Just tap them out, go from one side and switch over to the other so they kind of hit out evenly. Flip it over, do the other one, so they all come out. Next step is to separate this hub from this rotor. When I was doing the other side, how to do this sort of mystified me for a while. I was hitting it in here, I was trying to get it to hit out that way. I tried to hit around this edge over here for a while without any avail. I couldn't figure out why the hell it wasn't separating. As it turns out, these studs actually hold it together. So the right way to do this is grab the brass hammer and hit out each stub, and then it just comes apart. So we'll just do that now. Now this is a brass hammer. You use this because, like the brass punch, the hammer takes the damage, not the part you're hitting. As you can see, it's the hammer that took all the damage. And this should just come apart. In order to get it apart, you take the pry bar like I had up there or a cold chisel and hit it in between the seam of the rotor, and then it'll just pop apart. I'm just sort of fiddling around with it right here because the other side literally just came apart like nothing. So, but I just give it a few hits and it came right apart. Now this rotor and the other one is actually in really good shape for its age. Actually, I really don't know how it's old. I don't really know how old it is. I take that back. But either way, it's in really good shape. I'm thinking I could probably just go and get these turned down, take all the rust and stuff off of them, and make sure they're nice and true. But I could probably get away without replacing these. They're in really good shape. I might still end up replacing them anyways, but I'm considering just having them turned down. Next up, we're taking apart this whole spindle and steering assembly. First things first is buckle the shield. It's pretty much damn useless. I'm not replacing it. Alright, the next thing is to remove this big bracket that holds caliper on to the big steering knuckle. These bolts or these nuts rather, are very, very rusted on there. These are studs that they're bolted to. So I had sprayed some PV Blaster on there and letting it soak in, and I just added some more on. To make things easier, I'm going to use my impact gun. That'll make coming them off a lot easier. I'm using a 9/16. That's what fits on there. These bolts are very, very rusted, so it's kind of difficult to shimmy it on there, but a little bit of work, should be able to get it on. Next thing I'm going to do is, or the last thing rather, to take this all apart, besides the ball joints, is just grab a chisel and stick it in between where the seam is there. Give her a nice few good whacks. I assure you that it will come off eventually. I just have to break years of rust. On this one I don't actually have to remove the studs, as it's the knuckle that holds them in, not this part. Just gonna find a good spot and give her whacks. It'll come apart, I assure. There it comes. And here's the caliper bracket and the steering knuckle itself. This part does still have the ball joints, but I'm going to save that for another day. As you can see where I started cutting this one, but I didn't actually have to. I didn't cut that one. But this is the spindle, / steering knuckle, caliper bracket. That's completely tearing apart the rotor hub assembly deal. From here, I can start to clean up all the parts, take all the rust off, buy new bearings, and new ball joints, my lockout hub, seals, get those rotors, probably get those rotors turned down instead of replacing them, put it all back together so I can reinstall it on that axle. I completely forgot that there is a very small bearing inside of here on the spindle / steering knuckle. You take that one apart, you do the same thing like taking out a race. You could use a brass punch if you have one that's long enough, thin enough to get down there, or you could use a little pry bar like this, like I did. Just hit it out, go from one side, flip to the other so it comes out square, and it'll eventually come out. As you can see, I made a nice mess. I have one side there, the other side's over there. There's the steering knuckle assembly that goes with that over there. But it wasn't that bad of a job. Something you could definitely do in your garage. You don't need anything special. And that's that.